Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's great to see such a good turnout and so many people interested and keen in this really important issue. So as Hannah has introduced me, my name is Lianna Clarke. I live in Essex, which is where the IJM office is based. So moved there about 3 years ago when I started working for IJM, and it's been a really fantastic experience so far. I'm not just saying it because I work for them. I really love the organisation and really feel like it's a privilege to work for them. So my kind of faith journey started when I was about 16, 17, and I went on a Christian camp and I heard the gospel and became a Christian. And since then, it's been up and down, but I think a very significant moment for me was when I was about 18 or 19, and I watched a film called Amazing Grace. Has anyone here seen Amazing Grace? Well, it's a story that depicts William Wilberforce and a time of period, the transatlantic slave trade, where many people were trying to abolish the slave trade. And there was something that really affected me when I watched that film. I think something really impacted me, and I couldn't really shake it off. I was really shocked at just the abuses that many people went through in that time. And fast forward a few years, at university I went to St Andrews in Scotland, and I heard about the work of International Justice Mission when I was there. And all of those old feelings that came back when I watched Amazing Grace just kind of came flooding back into me. I think just hearing the realities that slavery still exists really shocked me. And from there I applied for an IJM internship and I got on, and then I've managed to get a staff position after my internship. So that's a little bit about me and my background. So I thought as we get into this evening that I would start with a little bit of a quiz. Some of these might be new to some people, some of this might be very basic to others. So true or false? There are 27 people in slavery in our world. This means that there are more people enslaved in one day today than in the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. Who thinks that's true? Yeah? Who thinks that's false?
Maybe more.
Okay, so it's kind of true and false. So that is the number that was estimated a few years ago by the National Geographic and Kevin Bales and other experts. But just this year, an organisation called Walk Free Foundation released a kind of updated report, and they think that it's closer to 30 million. But again, these are very conservative numbers. A lot of this is very underground, and it's hard to figure out exactly what kind of numbers we're talking about. But to give you an idea of the scale, we have connections with an organisation called the Human Rights Watch in India, and they estimate that there's more than this amount of people enslaved within India alone. So we're talking huge numbers. This is just an epidemic. How many people live outside of the rule of law globally? How many people do you think do not have access to rule of law in their country? Shout out numbers. It doesn't matter, it can be a silly guess. 1 billion, okay. Anyone else?
2 billion.
Okay, quite big numbers. Okay, so 4 billion people. So that's 2 out of every 3 people do not have access to the rule of law, and that's estimated by The Economist. Okay. In many countries, it's difficult to get a case to court. As a result, injustice is rife. True or false? True. So here's just a few examples of the kind of scale we're talking about. So in India, there are only 11 judges for every 1 million people. In the Philippines, the average judge has a backlog of 1,479 cases. And Kenya has only 63 prosecutors for a population of 30 million people. So you can understand how injustice happens very easily in many countries around our world. To try and give you a picture, to try and maybe help you understand why this happens, it's a question that I've often asked. How is that possible? Why does it happen? I wanted to show you these two diagrams that you might find helpful. So the top diagram is a picture of a functioning public justice system. So this is a system in a country where justice can get through the system. There is justice available for people. So in this top pipe, injustice can go through the police, prosecutors, judges and social workers. Injustice goes in and justice should come out. Now, we're not perfect in the UK by any means, but we have a law enforcing public justice system, so we're closer to this first pipe diagram. Now, in many of the countries that we're working in, the justice system looks more like this bottom diagram. So injustice can go into a corrupt police system, under-resourced prosecutors, unaccountable judges, and overworked and exhausted social workers. And what happens in this kind of bent, broken, holy system is that injustice goes in, but more injustice comes out the other side. And so one of the things that IJM is trying to do is find out where the problems are in the system, in the countries that we're working in, to try and fix some of those holes, try and strengthen the system to make public justice systems that currently look like this bottom diagram into more like the top diagram. And eventually we, in an ideal world, would love to work ourselves out of a job, essentially. So this next part, I just wanted to show you a 10-12 minute IJM film. I don't know about you, but when I hear some of these statistics and these numbers, it can just seem very abstract and not very real. So I want to share with you a story of one person's kind of experience of injustice. So we're kind of going from big picture down to one individual. So I wonder what you thought when you watched that. I wonder what God thinks about Suhanna's situation. At Just Love, I'm sure many of you are very firm in your kind of biblical convictions and foundations for doing justice and for loving people. But just as a kind of quick overview recap, I thought I'd just give the kind of big picture perspective on the Bible and justice. So the word for justice in the Hebrew and Greek appear 1,060 times throughout God's word. Over 3,000 verses speak of justice or poverty. Justice and the need for it runs through the Bible from the beginning to the end. And the frequency with which the Bible addresses issues of justice reflects the importance of these issues to God. And so just in the same way that if I was to meet one of you one-on-one, you'll probably very quickly find out what's important to me by what I talk about. So you probably find out that I'm a Christian, that I work for IJM, that I'm married. All of these things you'll probably sooner or later hear about what's on my heart from what I talk about and the frequency of it. And I think that same principle really applies to the Bible. And I think when we were praying earlier, one of the girls prayed this, and I just thought it would be really helpful to share with you just that it should be the thing that breaks our heart should be the thing that breaks God's heart. And I think that's a very important thing, that we see that this is something that breaks God's heart. And so we need to be sensitive to that. There are, as I said, many verses in the Bible. I'm just going to share two of these with you, and these are real IJM favourites. What does the Lord require of you? to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And then in Matthew 23:23, Jesus speaking to the Pharisees and really rebuking them, and he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former." And it's almost as if Jesus is referring back to this Micah passage before and telling us what is important to God. And I think one thing that I've personally been learning a lot lately is just, I think, the radical love that I see in the New Testament and how we're called to love the world and those in need. Our founder, Gary Haugen, says that for him, so he was employed by the United Nations to head up the investigation into the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s. And he was standing in mass graves where horrendous slaughter and murder had taken place. And he said for him that the question wasn't, where was God in all of this? The question was, where were God's people? And I think that in the case that I saw it with Suhana, that the IJM are really working to radically love people, to go to that extent to rescue one person, a city of 18 million people. Who would do that, you know? And so I think that that is an important lesson that I've been learning personally through my walk with the Lord, and how that connects to justice and love for people. I want to share 2 quotes with you that I found very helpful and inspiring. And really the point of them is that we are invited to be part of God's solution. There is something that we can do. So Edmund Burke says this, probably a quote that you've heard: "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men or women to do nothing." And in his book, Timothy Keller, in his book Generous Justice, Timothy Keller says this. He speaks amazingly of the gospel. It is so gospel-centred. And he says this: "To the degree that the gospel shapes your self-image, you will identify with those in need. You will see their tattered clothes and think, all my righteousness is a filthy rag. But in Christ, we can be clothed in his robes of righteousness. When you come upon those who are economically poor, you cannot say to them, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because you certainly did not do that spiritually. Jesus intervened for you. And you cannot say, I won't help you because you got yourself into this mess, since God came to earth, moved into your spiritually poor neighbourhood, as it were, and helped you, even though your spiritual problems were your own fault." And I find this very helpful, just reminding me that obeying the commands in the Bible to do with justice is not something that I need to be driven by out of guilt, but out of grace, and how I have received so much from God in terms of grace, and how I am now free to give to others and to help others and to serve those in need through grace. So if any of you are interested in thinking a bit more theologically or biblically about some of the issues of justice and how that relates to the Bible, there are just 3 books that I would really recommend to you. So Good News About Injustice, which is written by Gary Haugen, who's IJM CEO and founder. Tim Chester's Good News to the Poor, and then Timothy Keller's Generous Justice, which is the one that I mentioned earlier. I found all 3 very helpful in trying to think a bit more about what my faith means in terms of justice and what justice means in terms of my faith. So I'm just going to share quickly about International Justice Mission, IJM. Many of you are here tonight to hear more about IJM as an organisation. So I'm going to keep it quite simple and just talk about IJM in terms of our vision statement. What is it that our mission is? What is it that we work for, that we envision, that we are striving towards? Well, it's this: to rescue thousands, protect millions, and prove that justice for the poor is possible. So IJM works in 18 different offices around the world, primarily in the developing world, and we work to rescue thousands of people like Suhana. And we do this through undercover investigators. They go into brothels and places where there is slavery taking place, and they gather undercover evidence. So sometimes they have secret cameras on their shirts, and they work to see if there is a crime being committed. So if there is a brothel where there are children that have been trafficked, for example, and IJM then takes that evidence to local police, local law enforcement, and we work together to do a rescue operation to get people like Suhana out of danger and out of slavery. So since 1997, when IJM started, we've rescued over 18,000 people. And so that's 18,000 people just like Suhana, which is a great reminder for me every day. The thing that really drives me forward, that there is so much hope for many people in slavery. We work to protect millions. So that pipeline diagram that I showed earlier, we're working to strengthen justice systems to prevent people getting enslaved in the first place. So not only rescuing thousands of people, but protecting millions from ever getting into situations of slavery in the first place. And to prove that justice for the poor is possible. So in many of the countries that we work in, justice is something for the rich. Justice is not something that an ordinary person can access, let alone a poor person. So IJM has teams of lawyers working in the countries that we're working in to get clients' cases to court, to get them through the system, sometimes a very long, very difficult process. But we are working tirelessly to do this. So does this model work? Why is it effective? Is it effective at all? Well, I want to just show you one case study that really, to me, demonstrates the effectiveness of IJM's model. So I'm going to take you just quickly to Cebu in the Philippines. In 2004, IJM was given some funding by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to open up a new office in Cebu in the Philippines. And we were given a target. So in the space of 4 years, they wanted to see this. The minors available for sale in the commercial sex trade, so effectively children, sex trafficking of children, reduced by 20%. So they said in 4 years, this is what we want to see. So they hired independent researchers to come and track and follow what we were doing and to figure out how effective IJM's model was. And when the 4 years were up, they released the results, and this is what we found: a 79% reduction. So at the beginning, we thought 20% is going to be ambitious, it's going to be challenging, I don't know if that's going to be possible. By the time that 4 years were up, they actually just proved how effective it is, and it just really kind of unexpectedly blew our minds, really. And I can't remember the details of how they tracked it, but it was something to do with the ease at which it was to find a child. So I think as soon as you got off the plane in Cebu, they timed how long it would take to find a child to use their services. I think the first time they did it, it was under 5 minutes or something. It was very, very short. And then we saw that over the space of those 4 years, things got harder. And so we were very encouraged by those results. So that was something called Project Lantern. And the idea behind it, and this is something that IJM is really built on, the idea that when laws are enforced, the violence stops. Gary Haugen, IJM CEO, says that he would not know where to start to solve world poverty and hunger and issues like that, but he said that when it comes to violent injustice, it is not actually that difficult. All it needs is a bit of intervention and law enforcement, and there are huge results that can change. And so I think this is something that is very important and very doable and can really make a huge difference to many people. So what? What can you do? What can I do to get involved with this issue? What can I do to make a difference? Well, I suppose just simply we want to say we would just love you to join the fight against injustice. We're really encouraged by all that many people here at Oxford University are doing, and in many churches in Oxford as well. This Just Love group are really passionately trying to make a stand, and that is fantastic. But I just thought it'd be helpful to give a few practical suggestions, perhaps if you're new to this, perhaps if you've been involved with it for a while, but would like additional things to think about. So, first of all, we encourage you to pray. You can sign up to be an IJM prayer partner at the end on this resource table where I've got some leaflets. And once every 2 weeks you'll receive an email with some very specific things to pray into, to do with our client stories and to do with situations that are going on. And the book of James says that the prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. And we really believe that at IJM. I want to just share quickly a really amazing story. So every Easter time, we have something called the Global Prayer Gathering in our Washington DC office. It's where people from all around the world come together and join in prayer for IJM's needs. And about 2 or 3 years ago, a man from India was there, and he stood up and he just very boldly prayed for the end of slavery in his country. And it was a big prayer, but a few weeks later, we heard that we had got funding for over $1 million from the Google Foundation, that for some random reason they specified that they wanted that money to go to IJM's work in India to end slavery in that country. Almost the exact same wording that this man had prayed. And then a few months after this, IJM had its biggest ever rescue operation where we brought over 700 people out of slavery in a brick kiln. And for us, that was just real confirmation that God was answering our prayers. And yes, it's bit by bit, but there is so much hope. So prayer, I just encourage you to keep going in prayer. If you've never thought about praying for this, please start. If you do pray, keep going. Another suggestion is to think about financially giving to work of justice and freedom. So IJM has something called Freedom Partners, and this is where people commit to giving £24 or more each month. Maybe as a student that might seem a lot, but I wonder if you got yourself and 11 friends together and you all decided to give up 1 coffee a week and give £2 to club together to become Freedom Partners. It is a huge blessing to IJM. Just to give you an idea of costs, to provide one person with an aftercare package. So this contains things when we're actually in a rescue so that we can get young children out of the brothel, for example, that they are in. So it contains toiletries, pyjamas, underwear, a teddy bear, because many of the children are very young. This costs £19 to have one aftercare package. So by giving just £24 1 month, that is, helping over one person with an aftercare package. And one rescue operation costs nearly £3,000 to fund. So the work that we do is not cheap, and it's not possible to continue without financial support. So maybe it's not for you now, but in the future, when you're earning, when you're in a position to think about funding IJM, we really do encourage you to take that seriously. and to know how important it is. IJM runs a variety of internships. This might be of particular interest to many of you who will be graduating soon. We have internships in IJM UK. We run 4 each year. We have internships in our Washington DC office. I think we've got over 20, and that ranges from government advocacy to church relations, to donor relations, to all sorts of very interesting things. As far as I'm aware, the Washington DC internships last about 3 months. In the UK office and in other field offices, they can go up to about a year. So we do also have internships in our field offices. So India, for example, is one of our field offices. This is where all of the frontline casework takes place. And we have internships that, if you, for example, are studying law, we have legal internships. If you are interested in social work and have a kind of therapy background and experience, we have aftercare internships. And we also have administration, executive assistant roles, all sorts. So do check out ijm.org to find out more about our internships. Having done one myself, I really encourage you to do it. They give you a huge amount of responsibility. I learned so much through doing my internship. So, and I have a degree in theology, so you don't have to be a lawyer to do this. You can have all sorts of backgrounds and end up serving with IJM. We have something called Mission Freedom, which is the idea of setting up an IJM group in your community or in your church. So maybe when you graduated and you've kind of moved on from the Just Love thing and you want to think about setting up a group, we really encourage you to think about supporting IJM. The idea of it is that you can end global injustice through local action, that through prayer and action, justice and freedom can be possible, and you can be part of it. Another thing, I haven't got a slide for it, but that is really important, is just simply raising awareness about the issues. Things cannot be achieved without there being awareness. So a few people in Just Love have agreed to do something called Stand for Freedom, which is going to be this academic year for you guys. And it's where you basically stand for 27 hours to represent 27 million people in slavery. You can take it in shifts, so you don't have to stand personally for 27 hours. And we really encourage people to do something that is really going to very visibly make a stand against injustice and to raise awareness amongst your students. So I think you can maybe speak to Tom Christmas and Hannah and other, who else could they speak to if they're interested in that?
Anyone on the committee, if you know any, but specifically I think I'll be coordinating that. So if you're interested in that, please come and speak to me afterwards, and we'll be putting out more information soon as well.
Yeah, I think the more people that can get involved, the better. Really build up momentum around it. And finally, one thing that everybody in this room can do, it's very practical, you can sign IJM's petition. We launched a campaign to try and tackle the issue of child sex tourism. So the problem of British citizens going abroad and using the services of young children and teenagers like Suhana. So I can tell you more later about the ins and outs of the campaign if you're interested. But basically, the UK has a law that was introduced in 2003 that said it's illegal for a British citizen to go abroad, use the services for children, and not only they can be prosecuted in the destination country, but they can be prosecuted here in the UK as well. But the evidence that we've gathered only shows that there's been 2 convictions for this crime, and so we want to try and make it a higher priority on the UK government's agenda. So please sign this, take a pile. I can send you more in the post, get them signed. That it's something so practical, so easy that you can do that really will make a difference. And we're hoping to hand all of these in to the House of Commons in June. And I just want to finish with this quote. really sense that there are going to be many people here tonight that will be future leaders, that will be future influencers. And this is a quote that I want you just to maybe think about and take with you. When our grandchildren ask us where we were when the weak and the voiceless and the vulnerable of our era needed leaders of compassion and purpose and hope, I hope we can say that we showed up, and that we showed up on time. And this is a picture of Gary in that mass grave in Rwanda that I was telling you about before, just surrounded by bodies. Where he said that where was the church? It would have been so easy for the church just to make a stand for God's people to protect those that were being targeted and attacked, but they just sat back and did nothing. And so as you go into your future, you may be something very influential, or you may be something that isn't, and that doesn't matter. Whoever you are, you can really be make so much difference to victims of injustice. So that is my talk. And if you want to follow us on social media, these are our details. But apart from that, just thank you very much for having me.